You know, Russ, I'm sorry I didn't get you any vodka back there.
That's okay. Or you could pick up some on the way back.
Pick up some on the way back. See what the shotgun has real quick. Double shot. Grenade launcher. No. I'll go back to this one and get the laser.
Now that is upgraded.
Yeah.
Leggy! Oh no, she's dead.
That's an antlion, Russell.
That's an antlion?
Yes. So you do know what antlions are.
Yes, they're leggies.
That's weird. There's like nothing.
In some of our early experiments bringing Half-Life 2 enemies to VR, we found that antlions in particular showed promise and were interesting to fight, but tended to quickly overwhelm playtesters. They were able to get into the player's physical space too quickly, and applied so much pressure that players just ended up endlessly teleporting around trying to get away. Around the same time, we were discovering that all players, even relative novices, have surprisingly good aim in VR. The variability of aiming ability amongst players is simply much lower in VR than it is in mouse and keyboard games. To take advantage of the idea that players would consistently be able to make precise shots, we started testing an antlion design which players could slow down by shooting off the legs. Playtesters reacted positively to both the need for accuracy and the organic feeling that this gave the antlions when their legs flew off and the injured antlion continued to limp toward them. The removal of the legs was clear to players, but presenting the fact that the abdomen was invulnerable until the legs were removed was a long-standing challenge. There was no single solution to communicating this effectively to playtesters, but rather a series of small additions that communicated the behavior. For example, we made the abdomen dull and black when invulnerable, and changed it to match the bright orange legs as it became vulnerable. Shooting armored parts of the antlion would generate sparks and hard ricochet sounds, while shooting the vulnerable body parts resulted in orange blood spurts and soft impact sounds. We also designed the death animations to emphasize the abdomen exploding, and ensured that an exploded abdomen chunk was left behind after the antlion was dead.
What up, man? So we fucking did that.
You're so glad. I'm out.
In some of our early experiments bringing Half-Life 2 enemies to VR, we found that antlions in particular showed promise and were interesting to fight, but tended to quickly overwhelm playtesters. They were able to get into the player's physical space too quickly, and applied so much pressure that players just ended up endlessly teleporting around trying to get away. Around the same time, we were discovering that all players, even relative novices, have surprisingly good aim in VR. The variability of aiming ability amongst players is simply much lower in VR than it is in mouse and keyboard games. To take advantage of the idea that players would consistently be able to make precise shots, we started testing an antlion design which players could slow down by shooting off the legs. Playtesters reacted positively to both the need for accuracy and the organic feeling that this gave the antlions when their legs flew off and the injured antlion continued to limp toward them. The removal of the legs was clear to players, but presenting the fact that the abdomen was invulnerable until the legs were removed was a long-standing challenge. There was no single solution to communicating this effectively to playtesters, but rather a series of small additions that communicated the behavior. For example, we made the abdomen dull and black when invulnerable, and changed it to match the bright orange legs as it became vulnerable. Shooting armored parts of the antlion would generate sparks and hard ricochet sounds, while shooting the vulnerable body parts resulted in orange blood spurts and soft impact sounds.
Great.
We also designed the death animations to emphasize the abdomen exploding, and ensured that an exploded abdomen chunk was left behind after the antlion was dead.
How do I get into here? Weird. That's really fucking weird.
All of the foliage in the game animates in response to player touch and environmental wind conditions. The foliage animation is entirely procedural and is computed on the graphics processor using vertex shader deformation. A voxel field that travels with the player's body is used to track the location of the player's hands in space. The hands effectively draw motion trails into this voxel field, which can be sampled by the foliage's vertex shader and used to drive deformations, allowing the player to bat the foliage around with their hands. The foliage also interacts with wind, allowing us to give ambient motion to the plants. In order to accommodate a range of environmental design, we tuned the wind deformations at different speeds, from slight drafts to hurricane force winds. It turned out, though, that the ambient wind was never required to be more than a moderate breeze, and for most of development, the hurricane effect was unused. This particular zoo habitat was added late in development and required a critical extension to the procedural foliage animation system. Prior to adding this habitat, the foliage didn't need to deform in response to enemy animation or grenade explosions, but of course, this area is all about throwing grenades at zombies. To address this, we added a low-resolution voxel field that could be sampled by the foliage shader to apply additional deformations. This low-resolution voxel field, which is about 1 cubic foot per voxel, is fixed in space and spans the entire habitat. For comparison, the voxel field that travels with the player is about 2 cubic inches per voxel. Enemies and grenades within this space can write motion trails and impacts into the low-resolution voxel field, which are ultimately interpreted by the foliage shader as wind forces. This is when preparation met opportunity. When grenades explode, they are creating localized hurricane force winds.
Russ, do you think a head crab could turn a gorilla into a zombie?
Honestly, if there's a gorilla on the loose, I'm not sure a head crab's gonna make it much worse.
I got something. What is it?
Yeah. What is it, Dad?
It doesn't look like they actually built the weapon. It's like they, I don't know, discovered something. Or maybe they uncovered it.
What do you mean?
If I'm reading this right, they tracked it to an old apartment building in the QZ, but instead of going in to get it, they grabbed the whole building and built a vault around it.
Holy crap. They must have been terrified of this thing.
I'm trying to figure out whether we ought to be.
last for?
There were very few existing antlion sounds to work with coming into Half-Life Alyx, so unlike most of the familiar Half-Life creatures, which often had legacy sounds layered in, nearly all of the sounds for the antlions were completely new material. Starting with an almost blank canvas, we drew inspiration from the behavior of the antlions to inform their sound design. Since the antlions attack in waves, it seemed reasonable to us that they communicated and organized into groups for attack. This idea led us to incorporate complex insect-like clicking sounds, the final version of which began as recordings of European starlings, which turned out to provide more variation and character than insect recordings. Here you can hear the original European starling sounds. We took those recordings and layered them with designed elements to create the antlion sounds used in the game.
In traditional games, analog controls like levers, dials, and crank wheels usually play simple animations in response to a player's mouse click or key press. In VR, however, players with tracked hand controllers expect to be able to control analog interfaces by grabbing and moving them directly. To support this, we developed a new system that we call Anim Interactables. The opening mechanism of this health station is a good example of an Anim Interactable. To your left and right, you can see some more examples, such as a large railroad switch, the Vortigaunt's fire alarm doorbell, a crank wheel, a rolling cabinet door, and both the antenna and tuning dial on the radio. Anim Interactables like these allow us to give the player control of analog interfaces while constraining their input to an authored range of motion. The system uses the position and orientation of the player's hand to drive the animation of a model which defines the analog interface. As the player moves their tracked controller, the Anim Interactable continuously performs a search to determine if playing the animation forward or backward will place the interaction point closer to the tracked controller's position in space. This allows the player to drag the animation forward, backward, or hold it stationary. The result is an intuitive correspondence between the player's body and the virtual interface. Furthermore, these interactive animations don't necessarily have to make physical sense. Artists simply animate the range of motion they want the player to be able to control. These Anim Interactables have their debug visualizations turned on, so you can see the authored range of motion, including the nonlinear paths used on the railroad switch, the health station, and the crank wheel. Anim Interactables allowed us to make all kinds of objects in the world interactive, from mundane man-made devices to intricate combine mechanisms, without the need to run complex physical simulations. Feel free to play around with the Anim Interactables in this area before moving on.
Prison!
What now?
Wait, Dad, what?
It's not a vault. It's a prison. They didn't build it to keep us out. They're trying to keep something in.
Keep what in?
I don't know. I'm not sure if this data part even knows. But they got something trapped in there.
Whoa. Okay. So if it's not a weapon, are we still doing this?
The way I see it, whatever's in there doesn't like the Combine very much. So we got that in common.
True.
So, are we still doing this?
We've come this far. I say we keep going. And if you find out it's something we really shouldn't mess with, we'll call it off.
That's my girl. I'll let you know what I find out.
Sometimes large chunks of a level are shifted around or reordered as we work on the game. That's the case for this entire area and the toner puzzle it's centered around. In fact, for much of its existence, this area didn't even have a home anywhere in the game. It was originally built just to help prototype the toner puzzle mechanic. Over the course of a few months, the raw gameplay mechanics of toner puzzles were developed and playtested in a series of small test levels. Each test level explored a single gameplay concept. Those were things like using the toner puzzle to draw the player's eyes to something interesting, such as Zen flora and fauna, creating moments of surprise when an enemy head crab popped out of a vent, or requiring the player to thread their arm and hand in behind pipes or other tight spaces. Once we figured out which of these ideas were working well, we combined them into a single test level with a toner puzzle that strung all these concepts together in one single puzzle. Further playtesting in this level made us confident that toner puzzles should be included in the game, and we started adding them into other areas. But we didn't include the test level itself anywhere in the game. It wasn't until later that it became apparent that the zoo was in need of a pace break. We pay careful attention to player fatigue when we playtest, and look for cases where a puzzle or some exploration and resource gathering can be used to give the player a break from combat. There was such a need toward the end of the zoo level, and thankfully in this case we were able to make use of the toner prototype level that had already been built.
When we decided to resurrect our toner prototype level for use as a pacing break in the zoo, we had the opportunity to make some improvements and integrate elements that hadn't existed when we had first experimented with the toner mechanic. For example, the newly developed explosive Zen bloaters were added at various points along the puzzle to surprise players and remind them that they need to keep an eye out for these hazards. Also, in the intervening months, the toner mechanic itself had evolved from one where players merely push a ball of energy along a path to one which included branching paths and rotating junctions. This junction here in the breaker box is the linchpin of the whole puzzle, as the player must interact with it 3 times. Once to open the roller door to this back area, once to switch power away from the roller door to the last leg of the puzzle, and once to reopen the roller door in order to exit. Because this toner puzzle covers such a large physical area, including some zombie combat in the middle, players frequently lost track of the correspondence between the state of this junction and the roller door. This meant that they would trap themselves back here and not understand how to proceed. To address this, we made a lot of changes to the presentation of this junction over the course of development. The unique breaker box and tangle of conduit are designed to make the junction recognizable as the same junction from both sides of the wall. The shape of the hole in the wall and the orientation of the breaker box are designed to make sure that the player stands in the right location to have line of sight to the roller door and see that it closes when they route power away from it to the last leg of the puzzle. The door itself also makes a lot of noise and an unreasonable amount of sparks to draw attention to itself each time it moves. This particular puzzle twist was in danger of being cut for a long time, but with this series of refinements, enough playtesters understood its behavior that we were comfortable with shipping it in the final game.
for locking down the area.
Good luck trying to lock out someone wielding an Alyx.
Yeah. Good luck. Crap, last magazine.
The emergence from the zoo gave us an opportunity to present players with a dramatic vista and to show them how much progress they had made in the journey to the vault. This was challenging because the vault's position in the world was already determined to be above the parking garage, which the player would reach at the end of the map. But placing the vault correctly into port of that location left the vault looking too distant to create the dramatic view we wanted here. We also intended to portray the cutting of the vault's power cables by the Vortigaunt at this point, but having this take place at such a distant location was unclear and confused playtesters. The solution was to move everything closer. The vault looked more imposing looming above the player, and the effects of the Vortigaunt's cable cutting efforts were much clearer. All we needed then was a conceit to justify the two vault locations, the location here at the start of the map and the eventual location at the end of the map. Around this same phase of development, we were in the process of defining exactly how the player would bring down the vault, and our solution to that problem also helped justify the two vault locations. Tractor beams are a familiar cliché in science fiction and often share a common visual style of an enveloping force field emitted net-like from a single point. Using a tractor beam as a combined failsafe device to catch the vault served us well here. It allowed us to prevent Alyx from being crushed by the vault dropped out of the sky when the Vortigaunts cut the final power cable, and it gave us a satisfactory mechanism for moving the vault to the location we need it to be at the end of the map. Throughout the map, the beam itself also serves as a beacon, ensuring that the players are always able to recognise their new goal, the tractor beam control station.
One left. Out of mags. Three left. one left. Last one. There's somebody up there.
That's not Combine. Maybe a scavenger? Be careful.
I'm not getting around the movement now. Why can't he do it? Well, then he is on the way.
Eli, come here!
What is it, Russell?
Listen to this.
Whoa. Shh.
Okay, well, go get them. You took over the entire planet in 7 hours. How is this taking so long? Oh, no, it's fine.
The final twist of the game presented quite a few storytelling challenges for the writers. The game is long, much longer than a movie, and the surprise reveal of the G-Man at the end felt almost impossible to sustain over the entire experience. Everyone on the team assumed that through basic deduction, most players are going to figure it out along the way. So the solution, like in most good stories, was to just add more stuff. More details, more questions, and more nooks and crannies to the plot. The writers quickly realized that there was one big distracting name, Gordon Freeman, that would pull the players' attention away from any theories they may be cooking up on their own. We then realized that we could use the absence of the G-Man in the story, in the eerie parallels between the G-Man and Gordon's experiences at Black Mesa, to redirect player attention and propel the story towards the final act. If the player thought they had uncovered a new mission, to save Gordon Freeman from stasis, then the twist at the end could be secure. To pull it off, the writers created a new, mysterious character, a scientist collaborating with the Combine. This addition came late in the project, so the writers relied on another tried-and-true tact. Base the character on an actor we're fond of, and then do our absolute best to cast and record with that person. The chosen actor had struck a particular tone with the writers. She has an easy, in-command confidence, and a smooth southern Missouri drawl. This not only sets her apart from the other characters in the Half-Life universe, but makes the character easy to hear on the page, which is incredibly important when time is short at the end of the project. And once she was in the studio, her pitch-perfect performance assured us that we'd made the correct decision. Of course, then the scene still had to be built. Level designers figured out what existing chunk of level track could be bumped out to fit the scene. The area we chose previously held some barnacles and a few light puzzle elements, which the designers weren't upset to lose. The level track had to be altered to funnel you into a place where the scene could unfold and the player could eavesdrop without getting a good look at the character. This served two purposes. One was that it would benefit the mystery for this scene to feel furtive and for the identity of the character to remain secret. But also, we could shroud the performance and the intricate facial animation necessary to bring a character to life, all in shadow, for the animators and the choreographers. Like in a lot of cases, not doing the work was the correct thing for both the story and our tight shipping schedule.
Hi, okay, great, finally, hi. We need to move the box or this thing is going to be Black Mesa all over again. Well, now I'm telling you it is ready. Look, if it's still here when she gets there, he's gone. What in the history of today makes you think you're going to stop her? Look, this guy we've got in there survived Black Mesa. He raised holy hell and then just disappeared. We finally caught him and you're just gonna let him go again? Move the box.
Survived Black Mesa, then disappeared. Eli, they do have a super weapon.
God damn it, Russ, they got Gordon Freeman.
Oh, wow. That's good, right?
This is very, very good.
This is a miracle.
All right. So, let's go save Gordon Freeman. Oh, incoming. Hey, give me a second.
Overwatch, wheel spikes.
Three more.
Requesting assist. Copy that. Containment control is underway.
Okay, so the plan is to get to that control room and get Gordon. I'll be honest, people talk about him a lot, but I always just assumed he was dead.
Me too.
Hey, Dad? Are you there?
Yeah, what's up, Alyx?
If Gordon survived Black Mesa, where's he been?
I don't know, but I bet it's a hell of a story.
The purpose of this hideout was to give players a nice reward for being observant and exploring the environment. We wanted to highlight the story of scavengers living behind the quarantine wall, what their lives might look like, and why they might choose to live there. The person who lived here was referred to internally as the Combine Killer, imagined as a person with a grudge against the Combine who has chosen to eke out a living in the quarantine zone, spending their time exacting revenge on unsuspecting Combine patrols, perhaps eventually joining the organized resistance movement portrayed in Half-Life 2.
think they're doing in here?
Looks like they're milking the leggies.
Once we get Gordon back, we can really get ambitious, don't you think, Russ? Maybe we could take down the Citadel.
Well, he saved humanity once. I'm willing to bet he can do it again.
And this time he won't have to do it alone.
Watch it. I don't want to get any of this crap on me. Why? Is it dangerous? We're not dumping it in the pit because it's safe. Keep moving.
There are 3 magazines.
In recent years, video game streaming has become one of the main ways that players engage with the culture of games, and this is even more true for VR titles, where players who do not have VR equipment want to participate. To address this audience, we created a spectator HUD, which displays the VR player's health, ammunition, resin, and the contents of their wrist pockets. This information is overlaid on the 3D scene in the desktop window, and lets viewers track the state of the player's resources, without having to rely on the player to look at their wrist or open up a menu. The Spectator HUD started off as a tool used by the development team to display resources, as well as the state of controller buttons and other diagnostic information. An interesting side effect of this HUD was that it made playtests way more exciting to watch, because we as an audience had information the player wasn't necessarily aware of. For example, playtest observers might realize that a player had barely survived an encounter when the players themselves had never even checked their health. We even saw cases where players killed an enemy with their very last bullet without realizing it themselves. The highs and lows we felt watching our own playtests were something that we wanted to share with the streaming audience, and it's been exciting to see streamers using it in the wild.
Russ, what do you think they're doing to Gordon Freeman in there?
That's a good question.
Are they, sucking his brain out?
I think they're gonna move him off-world.
Well, either way, let's not find out. I'll get there before it happens. Never survive a jump from this height.
No, absolutely not. Why, were you considering it?
Russ, what's the deal with the crowbar?
Oh, you mean Gordon Freeman's crowbar?
Yeah.
Oh, Alyx! He fought his way out of Black Mesa with nothing but that crowbar.
No way.
It's true. Well, it's true that that's what they say. You know, nobody knows for sure.
Well, when I get him out, let's give him a gun.
Yes. Not mine. I'm out of the gun lending business. Okay. Wow, my gun's looking pretty good.
Russ, come on. At this point, it's kind of our gun.
Creating a climactic battle that capped off the antlion combat proved to be a challenging design problem. We wanted to create a sustained combat experience that was substantial enough to challenge players who had refined their skills against the antlions. But simply throwing a large number of antlions at the player all at once was not a particularly engaging experience, nor was it compatible with our established combat balancing. Rather than containing the player in a restricted space and spawning waves of enemies, we wanted to keep the player engaged and moving through a gauntlet of constant pressure toward a goal. To do this, we needed an arena with a clear linear flow and a porous layout that would allow the player to maintain sight of their goal while being flanked by swarms of antlions as they move toward it. This tanker yard, which we had originally built for a narrative scene that was cut from the game, had the properties we were looking for. The long tanker cars lead toward the intended direction of travel, and their positioning requires the player to pay careful attention to their sides and rear as they advance. The combine tractor beam tower is framed at the end of the tracks, providing a clear goal for the player. The placement of the glowing red sign in the direction of the tractor beam was also a deliberate decision, a technique used by the environment artist to subconsciously pull players in the desired direction via visual contrast, even in the event that they've momentarily lost their bearings in the chaos of the battle. The pacing of the combat here was carefully balanced to leave most playtesters on the brink of being overwhelmed and feeling like they made it through by just the skin of their teeth. It took many iterations of enemy placement, ammo and item placement, and player path adjustments to achieve this balance. We ultimately settled on a design that featured a steady stream of advancing antlions, with antlion spitters placed at the far end of the space applying enough pressure to prevent players from rushing toward the goal. Combine soldiers up on the raised platforms divert player attention to the right-hand flank and provide verticality in target prioritization, adding to the sense of frenzy we sought to create.
mag.
Creating a climactic battle that capped off the antlion combat proved to be a challenging design problem. We wanted to create a sustained combat experience that was substantial enough to challenge players who had refined their skills against the antlions. But simply throwing a large number of antlions at the player all at once was not a particularly engaging experience, nor was it compatible with our established combat balancing. Rather than containing the player in a restricted space and spawning waves of enemies, we wanted to keep the player engaged and moving through a gauntlet of constant pressure toward a goal. To do this, we needed an arena with a clear linear flow and a porous layout that would allow the player to maintain sight of their goal while being flanked by swarms of antlions as they move toward it. This tanker yard, which we had originally built for a narrative scene that was cut from the game, had the properties we were looking for. The long tanker cars lead toward the intended direction of travel, and their positioning requires the player to pay careful attention to their sides and rear as they advance. The combine tractor beam tower is framed at the end of the tracks, providing a clear goal for the player. The placement of the glowing red sign in the direction of the tractor beam was also a deliberate decision, a technique used by the environment artist to subconsciously pull players in the desired direction via visual contrast, even in the event that they've momentarily lost their bearings in the chaos of the battle. The pacing of the combat here was carefully balanced to leave most playtesters on the brink of being overwhelmed and feeling like they made it through by just the skin of their teeth. It took many iterations of enemy placement, ammo and item placement, and player path adjustments to achieve this balance. We ultimately settled on a design that featured a steady stream of advancing antlions, with antlion spitters placed at the far end of the space applying enough pressure to prevent players from rushing toward the goal. Combine soldiers up on the raised platforms divert player attention to the right-hand flank and provide verticality in target prioritization, adding to the sense of frenzy we sought to create.